Cool. So welcome everyone to our third demo. For those of you who haven't been here before, just wanted to mention that we are building out our Trixta IDE 2.0, and our goal is to have a working version ready on October the 5th for Vili and myself to start using. Let me submit somebody else. And so each week, our goal is to just show you what we've done that week and just talk briefly about what our plans are for next week. But as always, I'm going to start the session with a little demo of just some higher level stuff, higher level thinking. I'm just going to share my screen. 1 second. I'm obviously not used to this. Okay, cool. So I'm going to start off the discussion with an age-old philosophical problem, and that is you have a human brain and then you have the mind. So I'm not going to go too deeply into this because there's a lot of quantum theory that I could bring in, but I'm not going to do that. So I'm just going to assume that the brain creates the mind. But the brain really is a compute engine, and the mind is something emergent from that. And so we often think about problems in terms of the brain, but we don't always think enough about how we build things in a way that's similar to the way the mind emerges. So when we build software, we often give our requirements to developers, and then they happily build carrying the model of the software in their heads. And the question is that a really good place to hold a model? And so we all know about the age-old bus problem. And that's something to think about is, where do we hold the model? Do we hold it in documents? Do we hold it in videos? Or do we just hold it in people's heads? So, we've all, played around with AWS Lambda and that type of function. It's pretty incredible. I mean, you can do so much with it. But it is, if you look at the model on the right, that's more like an architectural model, but it doesn't really give you, that's more like the brain. It doesn't give you the sense of the real system. And people are looking at ways to kind of manage their lambdas easier. I mean, you can have hundreds, thousands of lambdas, but it's very hard to understand from each lambda how it fits into the greater model. So, in this example here, there's an orchestration lambda which helps to orchestrate the other lambdas. So some of the models may be held in the orchestration lambda, but there's still some deeper emergent element that is not modeled here. And often if we look at applications, there's the concept of API first. But even if you're going API first, there still is a model. People wouldn't start building an API without having an idea of why they're doing it. So there must be some kind of businessy model or some kind of system, model that they want to first understand before they can build their APIs. And similarly, people do data first, and again, data holds a lot of information, obviously, and it's more like the brain. It doesn't necessarily give you the sense of that model. And so, this is an example from another low-code platform from Techstars, 8base, but it's very data-oriented. So it'll feel very natural to software developers, but it certainly doesn't model it in a way that we think of the emergent model. So Trixta IDE 2.0, what we're building now it's where the model of the software is the software. So we don't model it on a piece of paper and keep it separate. We actually model in the IDE, and as we're doing that, we're actually building out the software. I'm just going to end off with just a quick look at the Agile Software Development Manifesto. So there was a whole bunch, of items spoken about at the ski lodge when they invented this. But 4 key elements emerged, and all of them are actually addressed by Trixta. So one is, it's all about individuals and the interactions rather than just processes and tools. So you might say, well, Trixta is a tool, but it's really a system that allows individuals to interact. We even have, as we saw last week, we have ways for people to collaborate. It's about working software over comprehensive documentation. So in the old days with Waterfall, we'd build all this incredible documentation. But in Trixta, you basically start anywhere and you start building, and then you can basically change it as you go. So you don't need to over document upfront. And the goal is to make something be working in some way as you actually start building the software, and then it just starts changing as you go. It's also about customer collaboration over contract negotiation. So you can have a very complex contract and argue with your customer a lot, but if you can include them more, and collaborate with them during the process, they'll be happier and you'll actually do better. And Trixta is basically allows the customer to be part of the process and to actually collaborate with you. And then finally, responding to change over following a plan. You can have a strict plan up front, but Trixta allows you to iterate and make changes at any moment. So it doesn't matter if you've gone wrong up front. As long as you actually start somewhere, you can respond to the actual change. And so in that way, we believe that the Trixta IDE is moving us towards a system that actually follows the Agile Manifesto. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Barry.
Cool, thanks, Mark. I'll give you a short update of where we are, or how we're tracking since last time I spoke. So I'll just share this entire screen, I think. On the right-hand side here. Okay, so as Mark said, October 5th is still our target date. So we've got 2 trend lines. Yeah, you guys are welcome to start betting, but we'll be pulling things in and out to make sure that we hit something on October 5th. I think we're doing quite well, actually. Most of the main sort of chunks are getting in and starting to sort of get to that point where I hope to use it for at least flow editing, which I think will then help us be able to iterate on building the project out itself even faster. As far as the main things that we got done this last week, there was some bugs with create step last time we showed that, and there was also we've built some stuff around login and results, which I hope, Dev, you can demonstrate for us after showing this. And we also worked on implementing custom controls in the step editor, which is quite important just generally across the IDE. I have been working on the flow layout of the branches. So if I zoom in here, this didn't exist before, so that's now starting to look good again in the new IDE. And it is actually, when I was working on this, I was thinking about one of the other attributes about Trixta that is interesting is that you can fold things, you can collapse things until they become simple enough to understand. So because it's sort of a, functional code underneath the hood is very tree-like, and we've sort of taken that same shape and sort of brought it all the way up into the business. And if I can kind of collapse, and you can sort of, if you can think about a role and kind of get to grips with one of them, then you can start to sort of delve deeper and deeper into it. And when you reach this sort of point where you are looking at a flow, for example, you can collapse as well. So let's say if this flow, pick this flow because it's quite complex. So you could collapse everything up, and then, it's a sequence at its sort of simplest state. So you could sort of try to comprehend each step as individual steps and sort of figure out, okay, what this step type is, and you could learn what it does. And then, delve further. If something is not working as you expect it to, you can sort of quite easily digest and figure out at which point your system isn't working the way you want it to. And in terms of steps, we have these results for a step, which you can then branch on. And what I'm hoping to do, which we couldn't do in the previous IDE, is be able to collapse each branch as well. Okay, so if you wanted to sort of focus your attention on a single branch, you could do so. So I'm hoping to have sort of like a collapsible button here for this group. So although there's only one label in each of these groups, you could have more conditions in one group that would sort of, the control flow would go down into that branch. And yeah, you could sort of collapse those, or even if you're debugging, you could collapse all the ones that aren't relevant. So you can just focus your attention on the code that is running. And you can keep applying that same process of, well, if it's too complicated, just fold it up and then make sense of that, and then delve into it further and further until you sort of understand it. Okay. Dev, would you mind demonstrating some of the stuff you did this week?
Sure, no problem. How does share screen work on this? I haven't actually used this in a while.
It's the thing with the up arrow at the bottom.
There, okay. Let's go for that. All right. You guys see my flow here. Okay, great, cool. So yeah, I've been working a lot more on the flow execution stuff. A lot of this isn't finalized yet, so this is some of the stuff I'm working on right now, and that's to get some of the schema work we have. So when you define the schema behind an action, it'll have like a specific layout. So you need your ID for a flow or something of the sort. We could have a schema that lays that out. There's a lot of customizers and custom stuff we can do around that layout. But yeah, the raw form is what I got working first, and that's kind of what I've been working on mostly, is just like the debugging of a flow and being able to like walk through a flow so you can see where the logic happens and what the values are and how things play out as the logic plays through the flow. So you'll see we've got some highlighting. I've got, let's extend that delay a bit so that you can see the flow happening a bit slower. So it'll step every half a second now in between each step. Comments obviously aren't logical things, they don't execute. We have some output results. So each step internally in the system, we can have like a out of okay or error, or there's also a bunch of other conditions. And that's also, you'll see Barry branching on a bunch of different things. But then we can also get the outputs of everything we're sending through. So you can see on that first run that I ran through with that 300 millisecond delay, it had the values that I ran in there. And then on the second run, I wasn't sending through any extra data because I swapped back to this other form. Yeah, I'm going to set up this data. So there's a few things I still need to optimize around here, specifically just like keeping values and that sort of thing. And also transferring values from one form to the other. So the idea is that if I start writing something here, these values will be available in whatever form is here. And then when I switch back to here, it'll have whatever the input value is. So if this is input or title, I'm not actually sure what this is underneath. It's obviously demo stuff. But it would appear here in the JSON, and it would give you the sort of default template of what this flow would expect in the raw value state. So yeah, that's kind of what I've been working around and what I'm working towards at the moment. So you can debug in steps through your flows and see all the nice pretty data as it goes through.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks, Deb. What I think will be great here is to be able to save example payloads for individual flows, so that, like Mark said, lowering the bus factor, if you've got you can kind of create your logic and also give add a lot of information to the flow to sort of help onboard other people as well. So you could use that for tests or just general demonstration of your flows to save examples of that. So it's very similar to how Postman might work. So you could use that instead. And I've now lost the screen, so I've lost my train of thought.
Sorry, man.
On the right-hand side was the logs. Yeah, it's something to be aware of, that in Elixir, there's no straightforward way to debug. So this is quite cool, and I found it quite useful to be able to step through and see what the output of each of your sort of functions is. And what I'm hoping to do as well, and we've kind of experimented with a breakpoint, is to be able to obviously breakpoint, but to be able to resume the flow further up. So as soon as it hits a point, it just restarts again at a certain point. So you can have like a looped section, and you can control the speed at which it sort of bumps through the steps. So that helps quite a lot, because I found throughout the years of development, when I'm like trying to get something working, you have to, if you don't get it right the first time, you have to sort of set up your scenario again, and then like maybe go through all the steps again. But because functional programming makes it a lot easier, if your state is exactly the same that you started with, you can expect the code to do exactly what it did the previous time. So you could, we could save the incoming information, and you wouldn't necessarily have to start the flow from the beginning again. So let's say you had some complicated interactions with multiple roles and things like that. You could then just focus on the small segment that you might be struggling with getting working exactly the way you want it to.
So there are a bunch of, like Barry mentioned, a few flow execution settings that actually already exist under this page that are just sort of hidden in code, because we don't have a nice big step forward button. It's not wired up basically yet. So as soon as that button's wired up, you'll see a lot of those wait till step instead of slowing down. We can like walk through everything step by step, and a few of those other interactions.
Okay, cool. Cool, thanks, Dev. Yeah, any questions? I think that's the main stuff that we have done, or that's demoable and done.
I guess we could talk about some of the flow input stuff and some of the role settings. So there's a bunch of UI drop-downs and specific scenarios now that we have covered. Things like relationships between roles and reactions. So certain drop-downs that are dependent on each other, all that information flowing through.
Can you find a flow with the request for response, or just to demonstrate what we mean by this?
Yeah, so some of these values under here are specific to what's available in the system. That doesn't come through with your average JSON schema, because we don't like hot load those into a template or anything like that. But it's actually like live values that exist within the system. So we sort of create a custom UI component that says when we need a role, actually pull our drop down in that allows us to sort of select whatever's appropriate behind that. Yeah. So specifically, it's saying like on the shared dashboard action, I want to be able to fire out a request under a role, and the reaction that I'm expecting behind that should be a reaction that already exists within that role.
On that role, yeah. Because now every step that is created in the system we allow for sort of a schema to be defined that defines this interface that you get on the right-hand side. And if you just go back to the settings there, so you can define these controls, and this interface will generate an interface for you based on the data types. So if you used a string, it would create like a text input. If you gave like a list of values, you might get a drop down. But we can also set a custom control. So if someone wants, let's say, the value that you want is a string, but you want a color picker or something, just as an example, you could specify that you want a custom control and which custom control you want. And inside that custom control, you can obviously do whatever you want in terms of fetching information from either this system, which we do here, where we actually go and get a lookup of all the roles that exist in the system so that they're relevant and don't sort of trip the user up. So we can help the user as much as we can be creative. But if you don't, at least if you just have a step and you don't do any extra work, it's going to work. But it doesn't stop someone from taking the step that they've created and sort of really making it a lot easier for the user through whatever means they can imagine on the user interface. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I guess the only other thing to mention is we've done a lot of work on the library stuff. So the next step that's gonna come after this, instead of this UI, which is just sort of an interim placement for hard coding in step types as inputs, we've done a bunch of work there, and that's heading towards a proper library. So with the old UI, we have a nice library layout for all those steps, where you get this library layout that tells you all about a common step, what it's about, the versions, the authors, and all those sort of extensions that we can put in place where, community additions to the library on different types of integrations, whether they be going to specific platforms or maybe talking to Amazon or whatever they may be. This UI is a lot of it's been done. There's some problems that we are having a little bit with fear and poking back and forth with them just around accessing a lot of the data we have in React reducer stores at the moment, and we're trying to get those to handle inside tier models. So there's just a few things that we're discussing around that at the moment. And that's pretty much where we're going forward to, yeah.
Cool.
Hand off you go.
Yeah, so each week we do this. Last week I kind of went into a bit of detail about spaces and roles and that type of thing, because I know that not everyone understands all the different elements of this. Maybe people don't understand that a step is almost like a function, and the flow system is an orchestration around that. But I think last week we managed to do about, I think, the first 10 minutes of the video. So I'm going to try and see if I can put that into a YouTube video, just to explain some aspects of this. But I know it's slightly foreign to people. Obviously each week as it gets better and better, it'll start looking better. It'll become more functional. We'll be able to do the Hello World system. But if you have any questions about anything, please feel free to ask. So I'm open the floor. Billy.
Mark, can I say something?
Yes.
I'd like to see practical real-world examples, solving little problems, because that's how I'm going to get my mind over this, because it is quite a different way of thinking. For example, we were, believe it or not, every now and then I do a bit of coding. And we did have a quest for a client that want Airtables. I don't know if you guys know Airtables.
Yeah, we do.
But it's a no coding environment. So in a way, it's also touching, accelerating development. They ran into a problem. They needed to sync catalogs. Those catalogs were, some of the catalogs were sitting in an FTP directory, a CSV, and some of the other were sitting as a web service API. Right. Now, simply, Airtables couldn't do it. Right. By end of writing a simple Python script. It took me much longer than it should have, because I'm not rusted. But I'm interested how something like that Trixta can handle. Like somewhere in between a non-coding world and a coding world.
Yeah.
I don't know who wants to answer this.
So I'll just say one thing before maybe Barry or somebody wants to answer. Obviously we're still building the IDE, and so this is IDE 2, and IDE 2 isn't ready to kind of demonstrate itself end to end yet. And I think what we would need to do what you want is to actually have an end-to-end demo. But the purpose of these weekly videos is just to show you the changes each week. So it's probably harder for us to do like that kind of a demo in this environment. I do think we can maybe do one like that as a separate thing. And I definitely think, obviously, closer to the end, we'll be able to do more of those. I think for now, as it's incrementally, being built, it's probably harder for us to do a demo in that kind of way. But
no, I fully understand that. I was just wondering how well takes a full space like.
Working with Airtable.
A coding world and a coding world are colliding, or if that may be a good place to start.
I think so. Barry, do you want to answer that? You've looked at Airtables, haven't you? Airtable.
Not in the context of Trixta, no.
Okay.
I can show you. I can demonstrate some of that sort of like close to the coding world stuff, but in the old IDE, I can show you how the Python stuff was done. Might be of interest. So let me just share my screen here. So, one of the things we realized earlier is that we've got to be able to hook into other communities and not be too sticky about being sort of Lexia only. I'd like to sort of be able to, have people use whatever it is that they can imagine and what they feel is best. And on our team, we have, it's Matthew's in the call here. Matthew's got, he's a lot more proficient in Python than Elixir. So he was able to build or write sort of a Python script, and it's used and executed here in the flow. So this containing step is really just like a Python script step, which says, all right, you can choose which Python to use and which function to initially kick off with, and you can pass it input values, and then each of these steps are just chunks of code that get sort of put together and executed on the fly. So if you wanted to also change the code on the fly, you could. So you could create branching logic in here based on your incoming parameters. So it's kind of like live metaprogramming for another language. So if we could get Rust and JavaScript in here as well, I'd be quite happy. So those would be the three sort of first languages I would like to support. We did do some earlier work with JavaScript, but there's nothing that I would be able to demo or show. That's
I know Jay's world is also very big.
Just a comment from my side, Airtables. I think brutal truth, comparing apples and pears, the likes of Adalo, Glide, all these sort of low-code platforms, the challenge that they're going to run into is sort of scalability and the interoperability of those systems. And I think Trixta does that completely different. So I think as Trixta matures, you'll probably start seeing the simplicity as you might in the likes of a Airtables UI. Maybe not quite as simple, but the power behind it's comparing the Wright brothers' first airplane to like Tesla's like rocket ship that's coming in 5 years. I mean, SpaceX's rocket ship that's coming in 5 years. What the power of the ability of Trixta is so much greater than that of the small Airtables, from personal experience playing around with them and then seeing what Trixta does in production now as well. It's really quite kind of remarkable.
Yeah, Matthew, that's for me who's the best. I think there's a place for everything, right? It's actually, the question was more, can Trixta play a supportive role for the non-coding environment, right?
Yeah,
those
sure.
missing. That's not really what the question is.
So, Billy, are you saying can Trixta connect with Airtables and allow you to build an Airtable?
For example, in my use case, it was jumping to real coding, working with a very shitty API, right? Airtables, right?
That was French.
Which is very frustrating, right? But I kind of felt like you need something in the middle. You need an environment to quickly reduce the limitations of Airtables. Particularly for that world where people want to do things fast and not spending a lot of time coding.
I think for your use case, Vili, something like Apache NiFi, when it comes to synchronizing data for that specific purpose, is a tool that's probably best for breed within that space. Trixta as a coding platform, you still have the malleability of writing code from scratch, which I think is, Trixta's, as you say, everything's got a place. NiFi is a tool that solves that problem. Trixta is a tool that solves potentially thousands of other problems, depending on how you choose to apply it.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, but I would like to definitely demonstrate more practical things as we go in these sessions. I can, we'll, on one side, we're going to be able to demonstrate things like load testing, integration. On the other side, do things like creating user interfaces quickly, and all the while seeing how we use the same sort of process to do that. Focus is to get this IDE more and more complete, and ideally demo it through that new IDE. So yeah, we can we'll get started with sort of practical examples as soon as possible. But I like that suggestion, because I think that would really help you.
Maybe just can add the last thing. I think the practical examples tell us where how Trixta works. It really will translate it into Afrikaans, from natural language, right? We can put it this way. But also second, and I think last thing I also want to state, I know this is not time or place, but this is what I want to accomplish. I want to understand how Trixta is going to help my consulting company, right? How effectively can my team use Trixta to reduce my coding time, reduce the bugs, and make it far more cost effective in this world, right? If we go back to the 80s and the 90s, I still love Delphi, a little bit less VB, but I love the era that you could have development so fast, and I miss that era, right? And I would like to see something similar, which you can literally in a few days put something together you can show your customer. It doesn't take weeks or even months. And that's what excites me. That's what I love to see. That's just my view.
Cool. So yeah. So I mean, I actually did program in Delphi in the old days, and I did enjoy some aspects of it. I didn't really like the user interface stuff, but I liked some of the things. I mean, I loved the event model, and that really, made me think a lot. So, like in the early stage of Trixta, when I was just trying to, well, even prior to the company starting, I was trying to conceptualize things. I went back to Delphi and I thought about some aspects of what they did. But yeah, I think that our goal is to, once the IDE is ready, is to add more and more aspects to it that will help you speed things up. Even building the forms, that Barry showed earlier, where it'll automatically generate some forms, but you can do better. You have to define certain schemas and that type of thing. Even some of the experiments we did earlier, where we used GPT-3 and now probably Codex, where we can maybe just use English. I don't even know Afrikaans, but I think we'll actually use English, where you can just type in some certain requests and it'll generate, say, certain forms for you, like maybe JSON schema form, schemas in general, and more. So I think there's a lot more we can do. But yeah, I mean, the hard part for us is that in order to get to B, we still have to do A, which is getting the very, very basics done in the IDE. But I'm hoping that each week we'll be able to show more and more. I mean, at a certain point, the IDE will be built in itself. So at the moment, we're using IDE 1 to help build IDE 2. But we're going to hit a point where we're using IDE 2 for 2. And once we do, I think it'll actually get faster and faster and faster for us to actually add on all the elements. Obviously, we also need to make it look pretty and stuff, because the older IDE actually looks prettier in some ways than the new one. So, but yeah, I mean, our goal is to make it super easy to build certain things, and that I think is something which will happen. Obviously, one of the values of Trixta isn't just the speed of building initially; it's also the cost of ownership drops, because you don't need so many software developers to maintain a complex system. But we also obviously need to get to a point where we can build faster upfront.
Yeah, and hopefully the learning curve is shorter.
Yeah, at the moment the learning curve is high. Yeah, it is very high. But as we build more automation and more conceptual systems where you can describe things, it will get to a point where it starts to become easier.
Yeah, see that's I think a last point for mine is, so how long does it take a developer to become productive in a software consulting company? It's definitely not 1 year, it's more like 4 years, right? There's so much that person must learn in development, and that's frustrating. That makes it expensive.
Yes.
Can you reduce that?
Yeah, definitely.
That's already a good starting point.
So that I think we can. I mean, our goal was to try and bring it down from a week down to a day, to learn Trixta, and I think we can get there, but we're not there right now.
Yeah, for me, it's the entire process is to also and then is to speed that up, and we have a foundation that will allow us to add those things in and actually get to the bottom of that. The whole code base has got a sort of air gap between it and the configuration of metaprogramming. So the underlying implementation, you can create a different interface or a different way of configuring this that suits someone and potentially suits someone in a different way. So you might have two different ways of interacting with the system depending on your, how you see the world and what you feel is easier to work with. But the underlying code that gets generated is still a sort of very precise. It's gone through a lot of code reviews. It's had a lot of sort of architects look at it and continually upgrade them. So that is the benefit in that you get that sort of enterprise-ready, scalable solution, even though what you're doing is just, working with the system in the way that you like to. Whereas I don't think in other platforms you have as much choice in that regard. But yeah, that phase that I hope to get into will, I'd like to get into that phase as soon as possible. And that means for people to collaborate as well and to give feedback, to be like, well, this part is, in particular, is tricky to work with. And I think that has got a lot to do with why we are redoing the IDE, because the previous one just wasn't intuitive enough and easy enough to use. So although we're sort of recreating the what was there before in the new shell gives us a lot of opportunities to sort of do away with those problems that were sort of keeping us like slow.
Cool. Any other questions? Anyone has? Feel free.
Yeah. I don't. I hope you don't mind me asking, but maybe just to echo something that Philly said, but maybe more just on a more sort of, that sounds rude, but a practical level for developers. Like, let's say, for instance, I want to get started with the Trixta platform, like just bare basics, 5-minute tutorial. Like it's like let's say a React quick start project that somebody can just check out, spin up, and see actually what it does when they want to click through something like mini game, something like that.
So there's one part of this this sort of whole ecosystem that is a little bit missing, that we've had sort of different levels of development on before, and that's the playground. So a front end that when you configure Trixta, you can sort of see this stuff working already in like in a sort of like interactable way. So you can create something, you can actually see what that would produce outside of the IDE. We might do it inside the IDE and outside the IDE, but I definitely think we need some sort of playground that you can work with and play around with and see, because I think having that instant feedback is so important to learn. And it's also for me, sort of take a lot of inspiration from sort of music software, and that you can hear immediately what you're doing when you're changing these sort of settings. And I think that would be quite a powerful attribute to have in software development. So as you change things, you can immediately see what sort of differences it's having on your configuration. So you can immediately learn what it is that dial is doing. And that iteration will be, so rapid that I hope that will make it easier to work with and learn.
Yeah. I mean, the old playground is it's broken relative to this product. So we will have to build a new playground. And so that is part of the journey over the next couple of months.
Yeah, it's just one of those things that it's lost priority as we've gotten busy, but it's as soon as this IDE is more together, that playground will become a higher priority and get our attention.
Cool. Any other questions for anyone? Okay, well, thanks everybody. I'm going to call it there. And Barry, do you have any highlights you want to talk about that are going to happen for next week, or should we just?
Well, I think we should probably plan on doing something practical. I think that makes a lot of sense. So let's aim for that. We'll build something, and just demonstrate that, and we can take some suggestions live and try to change things. We may need to work with the old IDE for certain things, if that's the case. I mean, I'd like to keep the focus on the new one, but I do think that there's a lot of value in demonstrating stuff as well. So yeah, let's aim to do that.
Cool. Okay, well, thanks everyone, and so hopefully we'll see you next week.